Hello, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you might be, and welcome to the first 2022. I have to check that now. It feels strange to say that episode of Books and Beer. And joining me today, Jim Heskett. How are you, man?
Hello. Hey, look, great to be here. Ready to talk about books and beer. Well, I don't know much about beer.
Do you not? Are you not a beer drinker in normal times?
I used to be. I haven't had a drink in a long time, so I'm
Ah,
I'm out of the game. I don't know anything. IPAs and all that kind of stuff. That's all after my time.
oh, fair enough, fair enough. Well, I would normally be drinking a beer, but I said to you before I'm not today. Because I was in Scotland last week with my wife, and they're very famous for beer up north of the border here, and so we drank quite a lot there. I've got a wedding at the weekend, and the thought of having a pint on a Wednesday afternoon for me was just like, oh, I can't
Too
face it.
much.
So yeah, so it's books and no beer today, but I've got a
Books and no beer.
juice. Yeah,
I got my coffee.
and you're on the coffee. Lovely mug. It looks quite mythical, in fact. I
This is
like it.
from Meow Wolf, which is an interactive museum in Denver. In
Ah,
Santa Fe. It's a kind of a new hipster kind of museum where everything is interactive. It's very crazy, very cool museum. Museum
I like
2.0.
those.
It's not
Yeah,
your dad's museum, something like that.
not like stuffed animals in dusty cases and that sort of thing, you know.
No, no, Meowth is wild. It's interactive. They have people there. Like instead of having museum custodians, that's not the right word, but you know what I'm talking about. The people who tell you about
Yeah.
the paintings. They have actors who work at the museum, and they interact with you. Like there's a part where you're in this dystopian section, and there's like a car machine, and the people who work there, they're like, "Get in the car, let's steal it, let's steal the car," and they have you get in the car, and then there's like a scene they play out. So it's really really wild, very
That's
different.
fantastic. Yeah, like the whole storytelling thing
Hmm.
goes into learning about the past and these sorts of things. Yeah. So you're based in Colorado now, or you're talking to me from Colorado? Is
Hmm.
that
Yeah,
right?
I've lived
Mm.
in lived outside of Denver for the last 15 years.
Okay. Where were you born? Where were you raised?
Originally, I'm from Oklahoma. There's not a lot to know about Oklahoma other than I escaped at a certain age, and I've been here in Denver with my family for the last 15 years, except for a year living abroad. I lived in
Hmm.
Australia and Singapore for a little while back in the day.
Wow, very cool, very cool. And the book I'm reading of yours, Wounded Animals, we talked about it briefly just before we came on air. That's set in that region as well, isn't it? I remember because the protagonist is sort of torn between Denver and Texas. That's it. Houston, is it
Yes,
Houston in Texas or somewhere in Texas that he's
Dallas.
sort
Yeah.
of Dallas in Texas that he's sort of torn between the two. Do you feature where you live in your books frequently? Is that sort of a
I do. I've said a lot of books in Denver. In fact, one of my readers a few months ago sent me an email. It's like, I have a hard time believing all this bad stuff happens in Denver. And I was like, all right, that's fair.
I mean,
That's
what's
fair.
Denver like? I've never been.
There's
Is it
there's not as many mobsters and conspiracies in Denver as my books would have you believe. Wounded Animals is one of my oldest books. Yeah, that one was set in Denver and Texas, and I have family in Texas. I'm pretty familiar with Texas. I try to set my books in places that I'm familiar with, or if I'm not
yeah.
familiar with, that I feel like I can get a good understanding. And so it's just
Hmm.
natural for me to set books in places where I've been or spent time. But yeah, Wounded Animals is one of my first books, and it was a novella, and I made it a novella because I didn't want to spend too much time writing it because I was still trying to get a traditional publishing contract. That was Wounded Animals was just like a palate cleanser in
Yeah.
between trying to get agents, and then I finished it and I gave it to some beta readers, and they were like, "Oh, what happens next?" And I was like, "I don't know. I didn't know there was going to be a next." So then it turned into a series.
So when was that then? What year are we talking?
Mm. Excuse me. I published Wounded Animals 2015, I think.
Mm, mm. And so you didn't go down the publisher route in the end. You did that on under your own steam,
No, I
or did
had
you
a
publish it? Go on.
I was trying to get an agent for a few years. I wrote 3 books. The first one, was just crickets from the agents. The second one, I got a lot of feelers. but nobody signed me. Then the third one, I came like this close to getting an agent. It was one of those things where like an
Yeah.
agent really loved it and we talked, but it just didn't work out. And then so by that time, it was like I was getting closer and closer, and I was like, I've had it. I'm just going to self-publish. And I do have one traditionally published book since then. In 2018, yeah, 2018, I won the Kindle Scout competition, and the book I submitted for that was published by an Amazon imprint. So that's my only traditionally published book.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, one of the great things about doing the way we do, so going directly to our readers, is that sort of you can write what you like and you can follow your own sort of heart in it. Do your books all sort of follow a similar are they within a similar genre, within a similar pool, or are you one of these writers, I think I'll put myself in this category, that just writes what they love and they think, right, I want to do this now, I want to do this now, I want to go and have a try at this?
Well, I've mostly broken myself of that habit. I
Right,
think,
yeah.
I think,
Sensible move.
I think I was very much more like that earlier in my career. I wanted to write thrillers and mysteries and dystopian post-apoc stuff, and those are all very different.
Mm.
So now I do have some post-apoc and dystopian stuff, but I've managed to move it to a pen name. But most of the
Ah.
stuff under the Jim Heskett name is thrillers, mysteries, no supernatural, no sci-fi, none of that stuff. I managed to get all of that because before, when I was starting out, I was like, well, if they like this, why wouldn't they like that? They're both by me. They're both the
Mm.
same writing style, but that's not how readers are at all. They they don't they don't want chocolate in their peanut butter.
Do you think there must be some sort of crossover, but you're right, there must be some point at which readers go, no, I mean, I see myself in this. I find books that have any kind of magic in quite off-putting, and I find it
Hmm.
particularly off-putting when it's a thriller and then something magical happens. I'm like, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa! I didn't sign up for this, you know.
Yeah,
You know.
there's a certain promise you make to the reader at the beginning of the story, and you're telling them what kind of genre it's going to be, and then if you lead them too far down one path, then you've broken the promise, and yeah, people are going to feel disappointed. I think when I
Mm.
was first starting, I thought like if I write a military science fiction book and set it in ancient Rome, then
Yeah.
that's two audiences I'll get who all want to buy my book. But it's not the way it works because you have to find people who specifically want military sci-fi set in ancient Rome. It's like you're not
Mm.
widening your
Yeah.
fan base, you're narrowing it when you make very specific things. So I write thrillers, and they're pretty general. I don't include a lot of technology or things that anchor them at a certain point. I try to make them pretty universal if I can.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. How many books have you got now? You must. I had a quick scroll down your Amazon page and was like, I don't think I even got to the bottom.
I I don't know.
Wow.
Probably I have. I don't know if you can see back here on one of my shelves.
Yes.
I have two shelves with my books, and it's not even all of them. I still have a couple I need to get. I have. It'd be easier to tell you how many series I have.
Okay.
Because I have the Micah Reed series, the Lane Parrish series, the Whistleblower trilogy, which you said you're reading, which is
Yeah.
it's four books in a trilogy, which I know that doesn't make sense. Um,
I don't think there is a word for four, is there? There should be.
the fourth is a prequel, but it spoils everything, so you have to read it last.
I see.
Um,
Right.
and the Six Assassins series that I wrote with Nick Thacker. So that's what, two, three, that's four main series. And then I have a few standalones, and there's lots of short stories and things floating out there in the world.
Mm, mm. Question for you then on the series point, and from my own perspective, I'm writing the sixth book of my Leo and Alyssa series now, which is the one I do on my own. Do you ever sort of finish a series? And I'm not saying this will be the last book at all, but I'm wondering, looking into the future and thinking, does a series run its course at 9, 12, 15, whatever books? Or do you leave them open and just every year or so just put another one on that series? What's your sort of strategy?
That's a great question. I'm sure if you asked that question for my co-author Nick Thacker, he probably would have told you to leave it open.
Yeah.
That's what he does. He's currently working on like book 13 or 14 of his Harvey Bennett series. I don't know if it was the smartest financial move, but I ended 2 series last year.
Mm.
I ended my Lane Parrish series and I ended my Micah Reed series. I finished both of those off because I just felt like there had to be a natural conclusion. Part of it is that with the Micah Reed series takes place mostly in Denver, and I was starting to think, maybe there isn't this much crime in Denver.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not realistic. But part of that, I closed off those series because I was working towards a future project that I have to be vague about in case any of my fans are watching or listening right now.
Are they what they are? I can see in the comments.
um, so I closed off those series because of something I wanted to do in the future, and there was wailing and gnashing of teeth. My fans were not happy, but I tried to use that as an opportunity to deliver the most powerful ending I could for each of those stories. I could have. Lane Parrish, he's an international spy. Basically, it's an international spy thriller series. I could have gone on for 20 more books, but I kind of felt like each book deals a little bit with Lane's internal arc too, because it's not just a story about him tagging spies and shooting bad guys. It's a story about him relating to his daughter. It's a story about him getting older and realizing that he's not his senses and his abilities aren't as acute as they were when he was younger, and he has a hard time as an aging spy. And then the series also has a big relationship between him and his handler at the agency, because he had kind of a romantic relationship with his handler, but she betrays him. And so there are all these series arcs that play out over all the books, while each book has its own standalone plot. There's these plots that played over the series arc that I felt like if I stretched out the Lane Parrish story for another dozen books, I wouldn't do his personal arc justice.
Yeah, I
And all that's
completely. I hear that. I
all that's
understand
a
what you mean by that.
big justification to tell my readers, stop being mad at me. Stop being mad at me. I've got to
Yeah,
write more books for you. They're coming.
yeah, I can understand that. How many books did you have in the Lane Parrish series then?
Lane Parrish was 7.
Yeah,
But
and how
Lane
long is
also
each book?
the lanes are my longest. The Lane Parrish are the longest ones. They were about 85,000 words each. My
Mm.
thrillers tend to be a little shorter, like 65, 70K.
Yeah, mine are about the same. I totally get what you mean with the sort of character needs to continually develop. Like I feel that in my books, and I do sort of feel that does limit the direction you can go. Particularly as you say, if he becomes, he gets to a point at which I don't know what the shelf life of a spy is in the real world, but in our fiction world, there has to be a point in which he moves on and does something else. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
that could be a series in itself, him being some kind of spying consultant for a secret government agency or something like that, but
Mm-hmm.
they have to change, don't they, in each one
Yeah.
for it to be that, to work in that way. And what's also interesting is, so you stop those to sort of give yourself headspace, essentially, to take the pressure off from writing more books there, so you can focus on other projects as you're going.
Yeah. Part of the problem, part of the hole that I've dug for myself is that all of or most of my series are linked, and they all kind of take place in the same universe. The
It's a
one
great
you're
idea.
reading, the Whistleblower
Mm.
trilogy, is the only one that's really sort of separate from that, because I didn't know what I was doing back then. But like the Six Assassins books, the Lane Parrish, Micah Reed books, they all take place in this shared universe, and people appear in each other's books, and there's all these crossovers. So I've established all these relationships, and so creating new stories in there makes it a little tricky.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is, in my universe, I'm kind of like backing up a few years and introducing a new character who will later on interact with characters I've already established. But so I'm
Mm.
writing this new series called Penny. It's called The Journal Hunters is the name of the series, but it's about Penny Hendrix, she's like a wannabe journalist, and she has some adventures with her friend, and then she is going to be involved with a character I've already established later on, but it's like backing up a few years, telling her story, and then we'll get to the present, and then maybe everybody's stories can be told at that point.
Mm.
I'm sorry, I'm so like vaguing this.
No,
I have to be real
do
careful
be
what I
vague.
say.
I don't want you to ruin anyone's, whet the appetite without
Yeah.
sort of ruining the surprise of it. So let's talk for a bit about your sort of writing process then, if we can.
Sure.
How do you go from the inception of that idea, the inception of the idea of the story, through to that book being on our digital shelves, however long later? What is that process like for you?
Um, well, usually the process takes 3 to 4 months for me to write a book. When I'm on it, I can release 3 to 4 books a year. The process usually is, I mean, I plan out the whole series in advance, kind of not like all the individual book plots, but when I'm planning out the series, I need to know what does the hero want for the over the course of the series, and especially what does the villain want?
Mm,
Because
mm,
in the genre that I write, the villain drives everything.
mm.
The thrillers exist because a villain has a plan, a villain tries to execute that plan, and then someone has to try to stop it. So it's really important that I understand the villain's motivations and what the villain wants, and then I just basically sit down like if everything would have worked out for the villain, what would they do? And I'd say first the villain would do this, then this, then this, and this, and then they would achieve their goal. And then so I start with that as a baseline, and then I think, well, what is the hero going to do to intervene? How is the hero going to make things difficult for the villain? How is the hero going to how's the hero going to explode the story, explode the villain's plans to make an interesting conflict? And then I go from there to outline. I write pretty loose outlines. I allow myself a little bit of room to experiment in my outline. Usually a scene will say something like, Penny learns where the secret plans are being kept.
Mm,
And that's all it will say for that outline. And then
I
I sit
see.
down to write, and I'm like, okay, where is she going to learn that? Okay, so she's going to need to be in a building. So she's at she's in an office building. Who's going to be there? And then I can come up with those scenes, come up with those details on the fly to still give me that fun of discovery writing, that fun of pantsing. But I
Mm,
don't
mm.
let myself. I don't. I end things where I intended to end them, so I don't write myself into a corner where like the story doesn't suddenly go in a strange new direction. I just allow
Yes.
myself to invent those details on the fly to make it fun, but I know where the story is going to beginning, middle, and end.
Yes, I see what you mean. So you must only have sort of a couple of sides of A4 for that plan. If it's that loose, it's just sort of the beats of the story, as you say. Discovers the secret plans, gets chased by bad guys, ends up in a such and such a place, whatever.
Yeah, I want to keep things pretty loose because I've been in that situation before where I was writing something and then maybe like on revision I went back and I said, "Oh, wait, this should happen here instead. That would be way cooler." But then you can't do it because it
Yeah,
breaks everything.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Allowing myself room to create in the moment reduces that kind of stuff because I'm always trying to think of what's the next coolest thing I can do at the time.
I think I'm similar to you then in that way. I sort of have a loose outline but I do like to change things as I go along. Like if it strikes me, I was like, why is it like that? All of a sudden you change it and this better story emerges, because there is something really connecting about actually writing that story, isn't there?
Mm.
There's something that you really sort of feel it in a way you didn't when you planned it, when you're actually there putting the words down sort of word for word.
It's got to be fun, you know. If it's
Yeah,
not fun, then it's going to show on the page.
yeah,
If
absolutely.
you're not enjoying it, then it's going to come across in the writing as uninspired and boring.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. Let's pause for a moment and have a quick look over at the comments because we've got a few people saying hello and asking questions. Um, Ray says, "Hello, Luke and Jim of the Great Beard." I assume he's talking about you.
Yeah, I know that
It
guy.
is a great beard, yeah.
Thank you.
Alison says, "Hi, Luke and Jim." Hello,
Hello.
Alison. Great to see you. Wilma says all the best for 2022. She's actually read a few of Jim's books. Brilliant. And she likes your style, very action filled and a lot of laughs. And she's about to purchase Shadow Soldier on Amazon. And welcome back, Luke. Thank you, Wilma. How are
Great.
things
Hey,
for you?
Shadow Soldier's on sale right now.
Oh,
Actually,
cool.
it's because Shadow Soldiers is my traditionally published book. It's the only book where I can't control the pricing.
Mm.
But it is actually, it's not up to me, but it is on sale right now. Yeah, you could get Shadow Soldiers for $1, I think, for all of January, I think, for the
Oh,
whole month.
fantastic.
But I don't know. I'd go now though. Don't
So if
wait.
you just search you on your name or Shadow Soldiers on Amazon or your local Amazon store, it should be there. In fact, I'll do that. I'll add it to my Kindle as well
It's
to
only a
read
buck.
after Wounded Animals. Yeah, that's it. Alison says she enjoyed the first Penny series.
Thank you, Alice. Yeah, Penny Hendrix and the oh god, what was the name of my book?
You got so many books you can't remember the
I
titles. Yeah.
just I just call it PH1. I don't the oh my god, I gotta look this up now. This is really bad. I don't know the name of the
Sorry,
book. I
mate.
just Penny Hendrix and the Charcoal Bullet. Yes. Penny Hendrix and the Charcoal Bullet is the first book in the Penny Hendrix, the Journal Hunter series. And that just came out in November, and I'm currently working on book 2. So Allison should have the book 2 out spring. Like early spring is what I'm hoping. But you never know.
You do never know. You do never know. So Ray says he first met you through your co-authored books with Nick Thacker several years ago, as well as the Assassin series.
Yeah, Six Assassins was a series Nick and I wrote and released in 2020. We released it right at the beginning of the pandemic, which was a whole lot of fun to to go through a book launch with someone else while the world is on fire. But
yes. I can imagine. I can imagine. How was co-writing for you? Because I've done some co-writing with Steve Moore, and I've talked to him a lot about it, and we're hoping to do some more in the future. But
I know Steve.
I found it. Yeah. He's a lovely guy. He was. It was, but it's a completely different skill I found to writing on your own. What's been your experience?
You know, I had written one book before with Jay Thorne, but that was more like a contract right to hire thing. So we weren't really collaborating. But then Nick and I have written 8 books together, and I still don't know if we actually have a process. You know, the first couple of books were I was writing his character. I wrote a couple of Harvey Bennett novels. That were like this prequel thing he was working on. And so that was me. Like I wrote it, gave it to him, and he'd be like, okay, change this, blah, blah, blah. But then the Six Assassins, we were actually going back and forth. And I think in the end, it came out really well. I'm really proud of the books, and I'm proud of the series, and proud of everything we've done. But we didn't have a good enough understanding of who was supposed to do what. And so things got very chaotic near the end. We're still friends.
Yeah, that's the important thing. I wasn't going to ask.
We're still friends. We're good. But so everything came out well, but it was very much a learning experience. And we're talking about co-writing a new series together, and we'll definitely have more procedures in place before we actually throw some, labor into it. Because I feel like there was a lot of wasted labor because we just didn't communicate properly the first time around.
I can see that. I can understand how that might happen. So were you sort of both working on the same manuscript at the same time, adding chapters in?
The way it came together is I had the idea and I pitched it to him, and he was like, "That's great, we should write it." And then so we got together. At that time we only lived a couple hours apart, so we drove and met in the middle over sodas and onion rings. We hashed out the plot to the series, and then the plan was I was going to go write like kind of short, incomplete first drafts that had room for him to then go back in and add characters, to add foreshadowing and that kind of stuff. And I wrote the first drafts, and then we just ran out of time. We didn't have enough time for him to do all of his part, so we had to rearrange some things. He was contributing less and only contributing certain things, whereas I was doing more. It sounds like I'm complaining. I'm not complaining. It came out great, and I'm happy with the work I did. I'm happy with Nick's contributions to it. But it was a painful learning experience.
Yeah, I understand that completely. One of the things I noticed about working with someone, though, a really good thing is that even if, because I did most of the actual writing of the in the same way it sounds like to what you did with my ones with Steve. I wrote them and he added in bits and bobs and edited, and you know what I mean, sort of did that final pass.
Yep.
But what was great about it is if I ever got stuck on something and I ever found something difficult, I could email it to him and go, right, do this, fix this, and that was, even though it didn't take him as long as it took me, that was a really valuable thing to have, because sometimes you do sort of write yourself into a bit of a sticky situation, don't you, when you don't quite know how to solve this, or it becomes you go down an alleyway that isn't really the right way for the story to go, or whatever it might be,
Absolutely. And writing is such a solitary process. I think it gets really easy for us to think that we have all the answers and
Hmm.
that whatever we've decided is correct. When sometimes you really need somebody else's perspective to take a look at something and go, maybe you didn't consider this, because there have been times I've like gone over and over and over and over an outline to look for plot holes and that kind of stuff, and then published a book, and a reader will come up and be like, how come this happened here? And I'll be like, oh crap, how did I not
I
see
know.
that glaring plot hole on page 2? It
Yeah.
happens. We get blind to the words on the page, and having other people.
And you want it to be true, don't you? You really want it to work. So you're like, no one will notice that
Yeah.
there weren't any dinosaurs in Victorian times.
It's fine. It's
Yeah,
fine.
whatever it is. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Do you work on one book at a time then, or are you sort of? I know some people can stack them to such a point that they're in the morning they'll write one, and in the afternoon they'll edit another one, in the evening they'll plan another book, and I think that would drive me
I
insane. But
yeah, I'm like you. I don't do that. I only work on one book at a time. And I know people who will, they like, I reserve the morning for writing fresh words, and then
mm,
they'll edit old words or edit a different book in the afternoon. And I don't do that. I mainly at first draft. When I'm in first draft, I don't work on anything else.
mm.
Because I want to just make sure that my head and the page have a pretty
In
constant
alignment.
connection.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so like, if once I finish that first draft, though, I might put it aside for 2 weeks and work on something else if I have time.
Yep.
But I don't like to work on multiple projects concurrently.
I know exactly what you mean. Do you, when you're working on a series, would you just work on one series then, or would you do sort of book 5 in one series, then you'll come over and do book 3 in another, and then go and do book, or would you rather just do 3 in one series and once you're sort of in the thread of it, and do 3 at once or whatever might
Yeah,
be the
I think
case?
I think what I should say is that I should focus on one series at a time, but I get I get bored with stuff after a while. Like I wrote 6 Micah Reed books in a year, because
Wow.
that was back when I had a day job, and I was like, I've got to do everything I can to get out of this day job. So
Yeah.
every available minute. I don't think I watched Netflix for that whole year. But every available minute I was plugging away on Micah Reed books, because I was super excited about the character. I was excited about the story. I was excited about making enough money to quit my job. There was a
Hmm.
lot that excited me about that. But after a while, I did something that I would not recommend anyone do, is that I wrote the first 8 books in the series, and with a ninth promised final book, it took me like 2 years to get around to finishing it. So I wrote the like 8 books, and then there was like a 2-year gap before the final ninth book was written, and my fans were not happy
Right.
at me about that. Um, but I had to, because like I needed.
Yeah.
I
You'd
think if
burn
I
out with it.
and also I didn't feel like I don't think I was a good enough writer at that time, that if I had said I'm going to finish Micah Reed's story now, it wouldn't have been as good. I needed to go
Yeah.
write those other things for a while, and then get some perspective on the character to say what's the right way to properly end his story.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. I get that, because you need to sort of really think about the events that, particularly writing a series finale, I can imagine you really need to sort of think about where that story has come from, and what was your intention when you first set out to do that. It's not just like chopping off another bit of cheese, is it? You've got to
Mm.
really sort of think about that as a sort of tying the ends together, and whatever, and try not to irritate people so they don't, add you to their blacklist of authors they never want to read again, I suppose.
That's the wor that's the worst part, is just that fear of letting down my readers.
Mm,
Because as I was writing that final Micah Reed book, there were plenty of times where I was like, this just doesn't feel big enough. It doesn't feel epic enough. People aren't gonna, you get to it was the ninth book, so I was like, so if this was a nine installment film series, if the ninth film wasn't the biggest and baddest and most interesting of all the films, it would be a disappointment, wouldn't it? So I got in my head a lot when I was writing, like, how do I make it bigger? How do I make it
yeah,
better?
and that's too much pressure, isn't it? Actually, if you think about it, there's enough pressure as there is uh, on for any normal book. There's enough pressure to make it better than all the others. But if you were like, right, this has got to be the best one ever, like, how do you even start?
Well, part of what I did for that was, I just happened to see, I was really into the 2004 Battlestar Galactica show.
Mm.
And I was watching an interview with Ronald Moore, the guy who created it, and he was talking about. I think maybe this happened before, and I just remembered it. I'm not trying to say like this. I just saw this at exactly the right time, but so he was talking about writing the finale of the show, and he said that he was, like in the same boat. He was like, how do I make it big? How do I make it impactful? And then he said he threw out all the action scenes after his draft. He was like, I just threw out all the action scenes, and I just told myself it's not about making the biggest thing, it's about having the biggest character moment.
Mm.
It's, what is the biggest emotional moment for the character? And I was thinking about that, and so I did change the original ending. I made it less action packed and more about the emotions of the character, about the arc, because Micah Reed's arc is about redemption. He is an ex-con, and he is an alcoholic, and he's just quit drinking in the beginning of the book, so he's a complete mess in the beginning of book 1. And then the series is about him atoning and redeeming for the things he did, but that led him that ended up with him in prison.
Yeah.
And so I had to think, like, look back to book 1 Micah. Who was he? Where was he? What was in his headspace? In book 9 Micah, and how are they different? And the space in between there is where I find the big, the big emotion that I'm looking for, is a way for Micah to look back on how he's grown, and for the reader to feel that. Not for Micah just to say, wow, I sure am different, but for the reader to feel it in a way. And that's what I hopefully I did.
But that is the hardest thing as a writer, isn't it? To, I think, convey that emotion and that sort of, as you say, tell the reader something without actually telling them it. Tell them he has, make them feel that without saying he's now been redeemed for all of the things he did, or whatever was your, that does take real skill. And I can see what you mean about putting that off for 2 years to become the best writer you could at that time. That sounds like and it makes sense to me anyway.
And I'm sure in a few years I'll pick up that book and reread it again, and it'll seem like garbage. I read my old stuff, and it makes me cringe now. I have to constantly fight the desire to go back and re-edit my old stuff.
Yeah. And you do fight that, or have you ever gone back and re-edited things?
I have. But like the book you're reading, Wounded Animals, back then, for some reason, I had this affinity for sentence fragments. You've probably noticed it. It's probably annoyed you while you've been reading it. But I had this affinity for sentence fragments, and I don't know why. I don't know why I liked it so much back then. But as I read that old stuff now, I want to fix it. I want to go back and re-edit those sentence fragments so they flow better. But sometimes I have, but I try to resist it if I can, and try to just leave it as that's the snapshot of who I was at that time.
Yeah, that's it. I think you're right. I think there's a point. There's a difference between there being a mistake in it. Do you know what I mean? And it being really irritating. But there are these sort of the sort of ticks, aren't there, that you have as a writer that you put in time and time again, and you don't know them until afterwards, and then you're like, oh no, I've used that word again, or that thing again, or that sort of whatever it might be again, and that does become a frustrating thing. But I think we're our greatest critics to an extent, aren't we?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
With things like that.
Absolutely.
So what first sort of dragged you into writing then? Because I don't think we choose to be writers, do we? I think it sort of chooses us in a way.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to be a writer when I was a little kid. I think probably from the first time I turned in a worksheet in school, a story, and got a gold star on it, I was like, ooh, gold star. I want more of those gold stars.
Yeah.
That was probably my first review. And then for a long time, life got in the way, and I worked in mental health, and I traveled and stuff. But then I stopped writing for a long time. I was writing in high school, I was writing in college, but then I didn't write for a while because I had to be a grown up and have a job and stuff. But then in 2011 or 12, I played this video game called Alan Wake. And it's a video game where you play a writer who's having writer's block. You play a writer who had a great first book, and he's got writer's block on his second book. And through playing that game, it like made me fall in love with writing again, because there'd be, scenes in the video game where he's actually at the typewriter. I'm like, yeah, I liked doing that. I kind of like that. And then after that, I just started putting words on the page again. I started with screenplays.
Oh, right.
And I did not become a Hollywood icon. If you didn't know that already, I am not. I'm not drowning in pool parties in Los Angeles. But it taught me a lot, because first I wrote a screenplay with my roommate at the time. I was like, hey, I got this idea for a story, and I told him, and he was like, I like that. Let's write a screenplay. So we did, and wrote a couple, and I learned about collaboration, learned about story. And back then, I was reading like every single screenplay book there was,
Yeah.
every single screenplay advice book, and then just ignored them all and proceeded to do whatever I wanted anyway. Um, but yeah, did not get a movie made, but it did reignite my love of storytelling and get me back into, at first trying to get an agent, and then realizing that was a flawed lottery, and instead deciding to self-publish.
Yeah, that's what a great sort of way into it, and that's an interesting way to go via screenwriting. I've spoke to a few people who've done it the other way around and have written novels and then gone into screenwriting. Was there a reason you chose that? Would that just appeal to you because you were a fan of film and TV? Was that?
Um, it was probably that roommate more than anything,
Mm,
because he had written screenplays before, and so
I see.
I was kind of in awe of him as someone who had finished something, because
Yeah,
I hadn't finished a lot of stuff up to that point, and so I was like, I had this idea about. I'll tell you the idea. I've told enough people, and I'm never going to actually write it, so I can tell you. Um, the idea was, in the '90s, I saw this TV show. It was like Future Technology, where they had a washing machine that would wash clothes without detergent by using sound waves to blast the dirt off the clothes. I was like, that's super cool. And then like 10 years later, I hadn't heard anything about this sonic washing machine. I was like, I wonder what happened to that. And then I thought, what'd be funny is if the laundry detergent companies squashed
like
it.
a conspiracy. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that was the story. The story was an inventor comes up with a sonic washing machine, and the laundry industry, the very powerful laundry industry, has him killed. And then uh, there's this
I
whole
love
like
it.
madcap crime thing trying to pin it on the laundry companies. And we both thought it was fun, so we just sat down and wrote the screenplay. And then I was like, you know what, I miss telling stories. I miss doing this. I want to make this my life. I want this to be what I do.
Yeah, it is so. It is such a great thing to do, isn't it? And I think it gets better when you're able to connect with the people who have enjoyed the stories, and that's why I particularly like doing things like this,
Mm.
talking about them and sort of giving a bit of ourselves more to the people who've enjoyed our stories, because that that makes it so much more, doesn't it? That makes it so much more sort of tangible, when someone else has got something from it as well as just you sitting in your room on your own making stuff up.
Yeah, I remember the first time I got a review on one of my books from a stranger. That was a weird moment. You're like, "Oh, I don't even know that person, and they liked my
Yeah.
book."
Yeah.
That's not my
and they've
dad.
cl-
That's somebody
and they've
besides my
clearly read
dad.
it as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that was an amazing feeling. I was like, wow, I'm literally, I'm reaching people now.
Mm,
That
mm.
was a strange feeling.
It is, and I think you don't realize how many, because readers generally are they're quite a quiet bunch of people. I think they don't shout about what they read unless you're in a particular group with other readers, then they do. But in sort of the wider world, people who read don't shout about it. They're not always saying they're reading, they're not always boasting about their reading like people who do other hobbies might do. So actually, you can be like, "Am I?" It can feel like there's no one there. Do you know what I mean? It feels like there's not many people around, and then all of a sudden you get into one of our sort of circles, and there's millions of us
Yep.
everywhere, reading books all the time. Buying books, listening to audio books, whatever it might be. You know.
Yeah, readers are by nature pretty introverted. There was a couple years ago, I had an idea. I used to run a lot of giveaways, and
Mm.
I had an idea for a giveaway that was sort of like a virtual lunch with me. It was like it would be, a few
It's a great
people,
idea.
and we would have a private like Zoom meeting, and they could ask me whatever they wanted. And resoundingly, all of them said no. They didn't want their face on camera. So I think about that from time to time. I was like, I don't want to do anything that will call out a reader or embarrass them or put them on the spot. So I'm
Mm.
very cognizant of that now. that I have an audience of introverts,
Mm, mm.
and most industries aren't like that.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because a lot of people compare books to music or to television, or for obvious reasons. But I think people who are into those other two sort of mediums are a lot more vocal about what they're into.
Mm,
I think perhaps because everyone has it's difficult not to be, it's difficult not to consume TV or music in some way, isn't it?
hmm
Whether you can consume them both very passively, whereas reading, there's an active element to it. You can leave a book here and I could ignore it completely and I'm not affected by it, but if there's a scary film on and I'm in the same room as it, I am affected by it being there.
Yeah,
you know
yeah, yeah, 100%.
it's an interesting sort of time, an interesting sort of place to exist. But no, I like it. But then equally, you have a very personal relationship with that person, don't you? Because they're in your mind for what, or you're in their mind for what, 8 hours, 6, 7, 8 hours, something like that. It's a real
It's
privilege.
strange. It's strange when I get emails from readers and they talk about my characters like they're friends.
Mm.
I get readers refer to Micah or Lane like it's someone they know and they hang out with. It is strange, but I mean, I guess it can be very real. There's been plenty of characters in fiction who are very, very real for me.
Mm.
So it's awesome that I can provide that for people.
Do you have a character that you are particularly fond of? That you would like to keep writing, or would like to bring back into a different book or something like that?
A character that I've made?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, I mean, they're all my little babies.
Yeah, I know it's a hard question.
Um, who would I like to see more of? Um, you know, I'm sure Micah Reed will come back. He's a very compelling character because he's kind of because he's a recovering alcoholic. And alcoholics are incredibly selfish people, and so he gets sober, and so it's about him reconciling his selfishness with his desire to like connect with other people. So and
Mhm.
in that way, he's a very fascinating character because he's complex and he's very conflicted, and
Mm,
he does things that are against his self interest.
mm,
Sometimes, I Lane Parrish and well, I guess Amber Clark from the Six Assassins series. I Most of my characters are not badass superheroes. They're mostly normal people who get thrust into extraordinary situations. Like you're reading Wounded Animals. He's a software trainer. He's
yeah,
not a spy. He's
yeah,
not
and
a
I like that. I like
he's
that element.
he's not ex-military. He's not an ex-cop. He's just a software trainer, and he gets caught up in something bigger than him, and then he's going to either go beyond himself or not. Uh, and so I think Mike is pretty interesting for that reason, is that he has like kind of combat skills because he was in this group that trained him, but he's largely a regular person. So when these
Mm.
crazy things happen, he's not like lower his sunglasses like it's time to take you out. He's not that
Yeah,
kind of, he's not that kind of guy. And so that makes it more fun for me, I think. Like everybody loves Jack Reacher, but he's exactly the same in every single book. And that's by design. It's not like
yeah,
that's not like a fault of Lee Child. That's how Jack Reacher's designed. Jack Reacher's designed to be anonymous, to be a drifter with no purpose,
yeah.
barely with a name, you know. And I never write characters like that. I write characters who grow and change, and um I don't know, that's what's interesting to me. And I forgot your
Yeah, I
original
think you're right.
question.
I think that's a real strength as a writer. No, I asked you which character would you like to spend more time
Okay.
with, so I think you have answered that. Yeah, I think you're right, and I think actually that makes them more interesting for us as readers, that we can cling on to their to their edges, and think about them as people, as real. They seem a lot more real, don't they? Because I
Yep.
mean, as much as the Jack Reacher, as you mentioned, the books are great. The pages turn themselves. You read one when you're in the airport or on a flight or whatever, and that's the end of that, isn't it? It's just like another. It's like a soap opera. It's like another section of the life that's taken off the screen,
hmm
off the page. But what you're talking about is sort of uncovering a character in more depth, and that does make it more interesting, I think, and more heartfelt, definitely.
Yeah, when you finish a Jack Reacher book, you're not going to be sitting around days later wondering what Jack Reacher thinks about the Omicron variant. He
Yeah,
wouldn't.
yeah,
He
yeah.
does. He wouldn't have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I know. I know what you mean. And it's interesting what you say there about him being a reformed alcoholic as well, because I think that's a sort of crutch or a technique that a lot of writers use, that someone has a drinking problem. And it's, you see it in detective stories, don't you? The boozy old detective that's half cut all of the time. You know, Bruce Willis in almost every story he's in was drunk half the time. You know. And I think to do that sensitively, like in the way you're talking, is a different approach to that, isn't it? Is a different approach to that as a sort of illness, really, as a mental condition, as opposed to just like this guy goes out, gets drunk, and discovers stuff or whatever. It might be in a different story.
And one of the main reasons I did that, or I don't know main reasons, but one of the reasons I did that was as a way to date each story. You know, like in
Mm.
book 1, he's 1 month sober. In book 2, he's 4 months sober. In book
Ah,
3, he's a year sober. Because here's another thing I did that I wouldn't recommend authors do is that I wrote the whole series. The series jumps around in time. Like the 8th book in the series is chronologically the earliest book.
okay,
And
that's interesting.
my readers don't complain about it, but I think it probably would be better if I hadn't done that.
Mm.
But so I like his sobriety as a way of anchoring him in the story, because like some of the
Yeah,
books take place before he quit drinking. So you can
yes,
see like if Micah drinking or not will tell you where you are in his timeline of life. Like in the Lane Parish series, in the first book, his daughter's 3. And in the last book, his daughter is 6. So you can see his daughter growing as a way to anchor the Lane Parish series in time.
that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because in my books, I don't want to put the year in them. I don't want to. I know some authors do, and they use events that are happening at that time to sort of anchor them in the present. Um, but I didn't want to do that. I want them to be a bit vague, really. So if you pick it up in 20 years, it's not clear that it's 20 years old. It could be, but it might not be. You know. Um, but actually having that sort of timeline is a really nice way to do it, isn't it? Because you're not saying the year
Mm-hmm.
specifically, but you're saying it's 2 months after this previous event, or 3 months after what you read last time, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I try to in Wounded Animals. That book is dated. I think it takes place in 2014 or 2015, and I had to do
Mm,
that because of the prequel. Because the
I see.
prequel had to
Right.
be set at a certain. But yeah, like you, I don't try to date my books if I can. I try to avoid using brand names and technology names too.
So he doesn't have
If
an iPhone. He just does a smartphone or a
Yeah, yeah, or
or
he
a
doesn't have an iPad,
mobile
he has a
phone or
tablet.
whatever.
He takes
Yeah.
out his
Yeah.
tablet and looks up something.
I
And
agree.
part of
I
that
agree.
was like there was a couple years ago where I was writing a story and a character was going to didn't have a car, needed to get from one place to another. I was like, well, I'm old, so I think taxi. People don't take taxis anymore; they take ride shares. And I
Yeah.
was I was about to write Uber in the sorry, I just bumped my mic. I was about to write Uber, but then it was right at that time when Uber was like in a huge amount of trouble for treating their contractors poorly. I was like, if I write Uber here and 6 months from now Uber doesn't exist, then I've already dated myself. So I thought about writing Lyft. I was like, Lyft is the
Mm.
second most popular one, but not everybody knows that. Everybody knows Uber. They might not know Lyft. So I was thinking about that and I went to some other authors and I was like, hey, let's make up a rideshare name and we'll just use it in our books. So we came up with Thumb. Thum is like an
As
Uber.
in to
Is a
thumb it, to thumb
yeah,
a
it's a
car.
thumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's a fake Uber, and I use it in all my books now. Anytime somebody needs a ride, they call a Thumb. If they
Great
need,
idea.
they go on a social media network, they use Town Hall. This is a social media network I
I
made up.
heard
So,
that in yours actually. I remember reading that yesterday. He
oh
hooked
yeah,
on Town Hall for this, and I was like, I thought it was like your version of Clubhouse. I hadn't clocked that
oh,
it was so long ago because it has the same sort of ring to it.
see, it still
So it
works.
does the same thing. I was like,
It
oh,
still
that's
worked.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I want to I like that kind of stuff. I like those little Easter eggs that you put in books just to see if there was a while there. And I don't know if I should say this or not, but the band Outcast, I included a few words of Outcast lyrics in every book, just
Nice. I do like
just
Outcast. Yeah.
just because I thought it would be funny and it was amusing to me, so I did it.
I like that. That's a really interesting point, doing the brand names. I'm gonna have
So
to
yeah, when
think
you're
of some
reading
of
Wounded
those
Animals,
myself.
look through
Yeah.
there and see if you spot any Outcast lyrics in the
Yeah, and I
dialogue.
might have my characters thumb a lift now if
Yeah,
yeah,
feel free. You can use it.
if
You
it's
can
free
use
to
Thumb.
use, yeah.
Consider Thumb to be open source. You can use it in your books.
Oh, I like that a lot. That's great. That's great, Jim. Let's have another quick look over these comments before we begin to wrap things up. There's
All
always
right.
a couple of questions, and one always comes from Alison. I love Alison's questions. I've missed them. Here we go. Random question. How do you get into your characters' heads? And do you find it harder to write a female character? That's two questions. So let's go for the first one. How do you sort of get yourself into the characters' heads?
By writing them. I don't. My first drafts are ugly. In my first drafts, my characters are generally all talk the same. They all kind of talk the same and
Yes.
sound the
Yes.
same. And then I discover the character as I'm writing. I mean, if it's a series character, obviously I know Micah Reed. I don't have to think about his personality before I write. But if it's a new character, yeah, I get into their head after the first draft. After I see the things they do, and then I learn about them along the way, and I think, okay, I can emphasize that, I can de-emphasize that kind of stuff in the second draft. And do I find it harder to write a female character? Definitely, yeah. It's always harder to write the other. And I mean, I'm working on it. I'm writing a female-led series right now. But yes, I do find it harder.
It's a fun, interesting question. I mean, I've never really thought about whether I find it harder or easier to write a female character. I think, I think because the things that my books deal with aren't the issues they deal with in those books aren't gender specific. They're someone being missing or someone doing something that's whatever. I'm sure females and males would have a slightly different perspective of that, but generally speaking, I think they're going to be quite similar. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. Maybe when I look back in 10 years, I'll be like, oh, you've totally underestimated that.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, I don't know. I don't typically write my female characters much differently. I write thrillers, and I think usually people of all genders respond about the same to a crisis.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I to answer your question though, Allison, I do find it harder. I think my readers like my female characters. My wife doesn't. My wife doesn't think I write very good women characters.
Yeah, we're not like this. What are you talking about?
But
Oh, I love it. Steve Taylor, hello, Steve. A previous Books and Beer victim is joining us, and he says,
hello.
that your books look great, which is
Thanks.
always nice to hear.
Thanks, Stephen.
And then they're talking about tea, Alison and Steve. And what does Alison say here? With the Penny and Owen new series, it's very comic. Have you thought about writing a children's young adult novel? Interesting question.
I have written a young adult series.
Right.
Under the name J.E. Heskett, I wrote a young adult dystopian trilogy called The Slave Games. This is very comic. I don't know. I like to make my series funny. I like to all of my characters are basically observational comics.
Yeah.
There's a lot of little thoughts on the world and little things like that. Because it's fun to me to write it, and I write characters who are usually going through a really tough time, but they're funny and interesting people. So Penny and Owen are both pretty snarky. We're both pretty snarky. So that book, Penny and the Charcoal Bullet, their banter was probably the most fun part of writing the book. Was the Penny and Owen's back and forth witty banter while writing in the van.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, I think I quite like doing those light moments in books, and I think they're quite important, aren't they? To just lighten the mood a little bit, so it's not tension all the way through. That's an important thing.
Yeah.
And we'll just have a quick look at this comment that Ray's said. He says, fractured or incomplete sentences drive him nuts. I'll critique them as allowable if it fits into a jagged action scene, but I've actually declined a contract recently from an author who submitted a proof that was filled with incomplete sentences. I just don't want to deal with hours of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
See what you did on the last sentence there, Ray. I see what you did.
Clever.
Yeah, I don't write like that anymore. It drives me nuts too when I read my
Yeah.
old stuff.
I know the feeling. I know the feeling. Yeah. As Ray says, if it's in a sort of action scene, a couple of short sentences work, don't they, to
Yeah,
really sort of move things forward. But all the way through, or in speech, actually, I think you get away with it. But in the
yeah,
sort of normal sense of it, it's a difficult one.
yeah.
Jim, this has been absolutely fantastic. I've loved connecting with you and having this conversation. Thank you for taking the time and joining us for your morning coffee. It's been brilliant.
This has been great. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, where can people find you and your books and everything you do? Where's the best place?
If you want to learn about me, that's jimheskett.com, jimheskett.com. To go straight to my books, there's a website, royalarchbooks.com. That's my old publishing company.
Oh, I see. Oh, fantastic. And thank you, ladies and gents at home, for tuning in for the first Books and Beer of 2022. It's great to be back after a break over the Christmas time. I've got Kevin Tomlinson joining me next week, so he'll be
I
in
know
the hot
him.
seat. I may have a beer as well. We will see how the wedding goes at the weekend and whether that's something I'm ready next Wednesday to crack open a beer. Yeah, Jim, thank you so much. I will hope to see you again soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.